So, you want to be a member of a military marksmanship program, maybe be a competitive shooter. How do you get started? Well, if you want to be a member of a shooting team, you need to be a shooter. Kind of like if you want to be on a baseball team, you probably should be playing some baseball, right? So, what are the kinds of events that you might consider? Well, first place that you want to check out would be official guidance. So Army Regulation 350-66 and Army Regulation 140-1, Chapter 7 covers the Army's competitive programs. Now, before we get started, why should you worry about a competitive shooting event? What's the advantage? Well, consider it as a tiered training approach. You first take initial entry training, basic, and then as you gain rank over time, you're going to take courses to expand your leadership potential. So you would next go to basic leader course, advanced leader course, senior leader course. It'd be like a natural transition. It wouldn't make sense to go back to basic training each time. You need to build on what you've learned previously. Well, that's what competitive programs do. The initial entry training that you got in basic included the qualification. And most soldiers never advance beyond that qualification. So there's really no place to get experience beyond initial entry training unless you seek it out yourself. And that's what these competitive programs are. Competition shooting is like NCOES for people that are subject matter experts in shooting. So how can we expand on that? Well, the first thing you need to do is make sure that you're up on current standards. Armypubs.army.mil will have all of the most current versions of doctrine, which are currently released as training circulars. Make sure you have copies of those, read them, understand them. There's no point in being a good competitive shooter and having gainful experience without knowing the doctrine that you are to apply it to. Once you've decided to go down that road, the easiest way to get started is to run something local. So for the reserve, that would be a postal match. They include exercises that can be used as validation per the training circular. You can conduct them with your unit during normal qualification ranges using current issue Army targets, but they provide a step up from the base qualification. If you think of qualification as initial entry training, because that's when you first take that qual course during basic, postal match would be like basic leader course. It's like the next step up. You can do it with your unit, minimal start point, but it's a next tier up. Again, this is straight out of the reg. Use it during your qual. It doesn't require any additional expense to the Army Reserve. You just have to have the will to do it, the interest to do it. Some of the military hosted events that you can consider would be service condition matches. These are competitive events that closely mirror the kinds of shooting that are most useful to the military, hosted by the Army Reserve, the National Guard, and active duty Army Marksmanship Unit. So service conditions matches, you're using issue equipment, wearing issue field gear, helmets, probably body armor. You're doing courses that require you to run down or run to firing points, go through obstacles, and shooting issue gear on silhouette targets. But the scoring is much more stringent. You'll have more stringent time limits. You'll have actual score zones rather than just necessarily hit or miss. You'll use different kinds of scoring, things that will factor your elapsed time in. These could be a hit factor type score like Comstock, a plus type score like Vickers count, time minus, some kind of a hybrid score, possibly. There's any number of ways that we can do that. Not necessarily new. Service conditions matches traces back to the late 1800s. They were called skirmisher matches back then. But the idea is to put an emphasis on field type shooting as useful to the military. Civilian matches. Now, service rifle, service pistol has been a part of Army military training since the late 1800s as well. The National Match Course was first developed when the trapdoor Springfield rifle was the issue rifle, which was our first breech loading firearm, single shot cartridge firing rifle. And it's been modified over the years with our different issue equipment. But the basis of it is that old. And Civilian Marksmanship Program and National Rifle Association are two organizing bodies for that. Make sure you have copies of the rule books for those if you're interested there. So service rifle, you're shooting across the course. You're shooting a rifle patterned after current issue. So it can be something that looks like an M16 or M4 or an M14 or even an M1 for that matter. More recently, optics have been allowed because most militaries are now using optics for general issue. So the competition has reflected that change. The basic idea is you're shooting from position on targets from 200 to 600 yards. Service pistol is the other common one from there. And it's the same idea. It's effectively the across the course version of shooting handgun. It's all one-handed because that's traditionally how it was taught, and that makes it much more difficult. I like to consider service rifle, service pistol sort of like the sport of shot process development. All of the factors necessary to learn how to become a better shooter are exercised in national match course shooting, both service rifle and service pistol. Excellence in competition. This would be another example of stepping up through a tiered learning approach. If qualification is initial entry training, step one. Step two might be something like a postal match. Well, shooting your first EIC and earning your first set of leg points might be like advanced leader course. And then going distinguished might be like senior leader course. So this idea of this is that you are effectively developing folks that are undergraduates because you don't earn points unless you're in the top 10% of your peer group in these different competitive events. You start by earning your first leg points, a bronze badge. You get 20 points to silver, and then to 30, you get a gold badge. That would be like successfully completing senior leader course as far as becoming a subject matter expert in marksmanship. Other events held outside the military, sometimes these are incorporated into military events as well. Action pistol, sometimes called 1920 shooting, recognizes the Bianchi Cup, which is the National Rifle Association championship for it. That's very close to service conditions pistol shooting in terms of the time limit and scoring, etc. PPC or 1500 pistol is another one. In fact, the current EIC targets we use for service conditions combat matches has scoring rings almost identical to the types of targets you shoot for 1500 shooting or PPC. Action shooting is another one. These are much more time-focused events with the scoring very heavily influenced by the individual shooter's elapsed time. International Defensive Pistol Association, United States Practical Shooting Association, Three Gun Nation, International Practical Shooting Confederation are all examples of this kind of shooting. A hunter shooter is another one. That's kind of like practical shooting for hunters. Sensible shooter is another type event, usually used on some kind of reactive non-steel target. Makes it easier to set up. Main thing is when people start considering what is the best kind of event you could shoot, find a range near you hosting an event that appeals to you and go do it. Get started in something. You're not going to become a shooter until you decide to be one. You need to find events. Maybe you host a postal match for your unit. Maybe you shoot some local matches at a club near you and get yourself involved. Work through a tiered ladder, kind of like basic, BLC, ALC, SLC. Find a way to progress yourself. Shoot a postal match, earn some leg points, earn some classifications from a nationally recognized shooting organization, and put yourself in a position where you can build upon your skill. The idea is that these skills allow you to enhance readiness and retention.